I went to the Sunset Five and I discovered what an asshole I was and how wonderful these people were. And I adored them. Everyone was so desperate for being seen on the screen or for just being out there, for existing. They had a sense of like, yeah, we know this is shit, but we're here and we're having fun.
The staff members at your local art house. They're generally as odd as the films they show, but thank God for that. Because without their disregard for corporate uniformity, the experience of going to the cinema might just not have that distinctive quality that makes each visit unique. In this episode of Inside the Art House, we get to talk with Roger Christensen, a longtime movie theater employee who spent the last part of his 40-plus year career as the general manager of the Sunset Five in West Hollywood. At a time when that venue was the hottest art house west of the Angelica in New York, he was there when indie icons like Todd Haynes, Lisa Cholodenko, and Doug Liman debuted their first films. And just to prove that it wasn't all Oscars and accolades, he also bears some responsibility for the launch of the phenomenon of Tommy Wiseau and the Room. Downtown movie palaces fade away, new venues take over as the audience shifts geographically. Single screens give way to multiplexes. But through it all, the audience still craves that moment when the house lights dim and the screen comes to life. And for the people who work at the theater, the managers, projectionists, and box office personnel, they get to share in that journey of change and discovery that comes with seeing a great movie. We had a lot of fun recording this episode, and we hope you'll also find it fun and illuminating. Join us as we share war stories with Roger Christensen, general manager of the Sunset Five in West Hollywood, on Inside the Art House. Starting now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Lemley, and welcome to Inside the Art House. My usual co-host, Raphael Sparge, is on set, so he's not able to join me here at the Royal Theater in West Los Angeles, where we shoot these episodes. But he is going to join us remotely because he wanted to be here with our special guest, Roger Christensen, an art house veteran, more years in the art house than I have, which is,
And don't you forget that.
Today we're hearing the good, the bad, the ugly, the untold stories of managing an art house movie theater.
I'm nervous about the ugly part. Like it's one of those don't get him started things, and I'm more of a polite gentleman these days.
How about Art House Confidential? Does that
Art House Confidential? Yeah, I don't. For me, it's all a dream. I love managing movie theaters. It's childhood thing, and this, you guys have been so good to me and so tolerant of me.
Well, okay, so first I'm going to say that whatever NDA you signed when you left our employment, we're well past any statute of limitation kind of issues. So I want the unvarnished and don't hold back here, Roger.
Yeah. Oh gosh, people should never say that to me. I'm going to wake up going, "Oh, what did I do?" So no.
We can always.
No, I'm teasing.
We can always redact names. In post.
I'm giving a tease to stuff I'm not even offering.
Yes, exactly.
I'm jerking the audience around here. This is excuse me. And anyway,
so let me start. Former manager, someone you know,
yes.
would when patrons would ask him what movie to see, his reply always was, "I'm a pusher, not a user." And that's maybe just because he was worried he didn't want to have his. But are you a pusher as a theater manager? Were you a pusher or were you a user? Did you get into this because you loved movies or just because you loved the environment?
Lemley audiences were a comfortable zone on that. They're very opinionated and. The ones that were regulars, I had like relationships with in terms of talking about movies, and we could very easily disagree. Like, okay, this is me, but this is what I loved. You made this
right, but I'm not talking about your interaction with the patrons. Just you personally. I mean, are you a movie fan?
Yeah,
or
yeah, but from another planet or from another world. I like the older films. I like the classic foreign films. I'm right out of the Bergman era, and the Truffauts and the French New Wave and all of that. And I'm kind of stuck in that a little bit. I watch new films, and I'm always excited about things that are innovative and stuff, But I'm also a sucker for trashy melodrama from the past.
Who doesn't like a nice Douglas Sirk film? Come on.
Oh, I love Sirk and all that stuff, and I don't care how many eye rolls people give me. I'm there and I'm crying, and I live with it. Yes, but you have Sirk. That's a relative of yours, isn't Susan Connor?
Susan Connor is not a relative.
Not a relative,
no.
but someone.
Susan's father was Paul Connor, who was my grandfather's best friend.
Imitation of life, baby.
There you go.
Doesn't get better than that.
And then Susan's two kids are Paul and Chris Weitz.
That's right.
Art house through the years.
Yeah. I have a question I want to ask you, Greg. There's a certain amount of urban legends about Laemmle theaters, and maybe they're just BS, but, there was a time, of course, when Laemmle theaters were in Westwood.
Yes.
They came into Westwood in the mid to late 60s, and the leases expired and were grabbed up by Man Theaters in the early 80s. My understanding of, and I think the only current standing one that's running anything now in Westwood is like the Regent.
The Regent is still there, yes.
Is still there.
Now the landmark Westwood.
Now, right. And it was a former rug store.
Perhaps,
This is the urban legend. That it was a former rug store in which a guy was going to come in and turn into a movie theater, but it was like Shan Sales or someone.
Yes,
and
that's exactly
what
what
he did
it was.
Like erotic films. Maybe it was pre-porn era, but it was probably kind of...
back in that area, it would have been some of the Russ Meyer
It would have been like Russ Meyer type stuff.
I Am Curious Yellow.
And apparently the neighborhood got all upset and shut that down.
No, that's not it.
It's not it. Okay.
So
how did Max Laemmle get it?
He was, as I understand, this is before I was, before I was born or when I was an infant.
I was old.
He was going to build the Regent, the theater that on the property that was the Regent.
Right.
We came in and we were building the Plaza Theater. Okay. Which was the first theater that had been built in Westwood since the Village and the Bruin.
Lovely.
And he didn't want to compete with us.
Okay.
Because there might not be enough film. Who's going to play? And so on and so forth. So he says, well, rather than compete, I'm going to sell the project, which was not, just a lease. It wasn't even but I'm going to sell this project to the Laemmles instead.
Okay.
And that's how we ended up with both the Plaza and the Regent.
Okay.
Shan did not want to compete, with us.
Okay. So here's the other legend.
Okay.
So it opens and you run some sort of ballet film there or whatever,
First film was,
I remember the Plaza.
Les Amants. No, that was the first film but Les Amants de Teruel and some of these other, yes.
And I remember the Plaza well because I worked there. I was an assistant manager. It was just lovely. It was odd, too, because the Regent was barely 400 seats and was just a box, but it was right in the thick of things there, And the Plaza was a couple blocks over, but it was 660 seats. It was really lovely, but it was booked stronger. In those days, there was a relationship with the United Artists, and it seemed like all the United Artists movies would play, at the Regent or the Plaza. And there were the exclusive LA County run of Raging Bull, and Network and the early Woody Allen films and all that stuff. It was astounding, But what I'd heard about the Regent specifically was that it was the first big film there was A Man and a Woman, which ran for a long time.
Trying to remember if it was the Regent or the Plaza, but it was
the Regent. The story that was told to me was that picture actually opened at a theater on Pico Avenue called the Lido.
That's correct.
Ran for a limited time into results, and then Max picked it up at like a 35% rental.
Move over deal.
A move over deal, 35%, but guaranteed that it would be exclusive. So it moved to the Regent, and then it takes off.
Yeah, ran for 2 years.
And ran for 2 years, at there. And the tagline to the story that was told to me, he says, and that was the movie that financed the Monica Theater.
That probably financed a lot more than that, but certainly. But certainly.
Because in those days.
Westwood,
Well, Westwood in that era, I would hear that the two Westwood theaters were really like 50% of the gross of all the Laemmle theaters. It was so,
potential.
It was strange. It was strange in my own experience. I liked being part of the era where there were single screen theaters that had long runs.
Right.
And of course, that's certainly true of the Royal and the Music Hall. And the Music Hall had 700 some seats, was considered a small theater in those days.
Right.
I remember Beverly Hills in the early to mid 60s, and it was a first run zone that's totally gone.
Yeah.
And the big theaters were the Fox Wilshire and the Warner Beverly and the Carthay Circle and the Beverly. They're all gone. And the small ones were the Music Hall and the Fine Art.
And they're the ones that are still there.
And there's this weird thing, when Westwood happened, to me, part of Westwood happening is it's a combination of, if I'm right, Beverly Hills not wanting outsiders and having parking issues with people parking in front of their houses, kind of slowly getting more hostile to theaters. But also it was the opening of the 405, which is in the mid 60s, 62, 63, which made it suddenly that was accessible, because I remember in the old days when the Bruin and the Village were like neighborhood theaters that were on a run that was when things went wide. They often had double features. And it's not until suddenly somewhere like about 65, 66, you see movies opening exclusively at the Village or the Bruin, and it ultimately became a Westwood thing. And it was
A Man and a Woman was definitely part of that. I mean, and by the way, came out of the Lido so they could open Blow Up.
Right.
That was the the important new booking
that was
they had.
Sure, which is an important film.
Which is a very important film. I mean, we can argue about whether it's a more important film than Lelouch Picture, but
I don't know.
I'm certainly not going to talk down A Man and a Woman. It made the company. It made Westwood.
Listen,
and you're right. I mean, there were neighborhoods that were first-run neighborhoods, and there were neighborhoods that were second wave, third wave, fourth wave, whatever. When did you start? Did you start in Westwood with us?
I started actually in Encino for just a couple of months. I was hired in Encino. I'm Valley trash. I live in Sherman Oaks. That was late 70s, like 78 or so. I was at the tail end of the Westwood stuff. But I was in Encino for just a month or two, and I transferred to the Plaza.
Okay.
And was there until the Plaza closed. The Lumleys left the Plaza, and then I take a brief 3-year intermission at the New Art, and we'll get to that.
When did you?
And then I come back to
what was your first movie theater job?
Oh, as a kid, I was an usher at the Warner Theater in Fresno, and I worked at a drive-in theater in Fresno and a little neighborhood theater. It was always something that was very exciting for me, and it was kind of people were. My family was just embarrassed that I was like, he really likes this. Lacks ambition, but or whatever. But I love movies and I love the experience. I grew up just mesmerized by the whole experience, and I love people going out and all that, But here in Los Angeles, it was with the Laemmles.
That was your first theater job, or were there some other? Because didn't you work like at some of the downtown palaces or the Westlake Theater?
That's right. No, back in '63 when I was out of high school, I was sort of a semi-teen runaway living in, not really, but I went to LA City College briefly and ultimately moved back. But I worked at the Los Angeles Theater on Broadway and 6th.
Oh my God.
I mean, holy cow. And it was worth it just to stand in that massive lobby, where they held the premiere of City Lights. I mean, it was just an amazing experience, and I loved every minute of it. But I needed to get a,
And that theater, so that was still a first-run theater at that time?
Well, in the 60s, yes. The downtown theaters by then were part of a wide break. There were no exclusives downtown anymore. There was a time where a lot of times they would play a Broadway theater and Hollywood. You would see the Paramount in Hollywood and the Paramount downtown, which was demolished in the 60s. That was like the largest theater in downtown Los Angeles, or the Orpheum, or the Hill Street and the Pantages were both like old RKO houses that would play the RKO films and stuff. And of course, the Warner Hollywood and the now the Pacific and the what was the
which is
Warner,
closed. It's not
which
open.
is closed, right? And the Warner downtown, which was 7th and Hill, which is now like a jewelry center or something like that, and where they shot Funny Girl, where in a couple of the scenes are. That's downtown LA, baby.
Well, you've certainly seen some changes in movie going. And movie exhibition.
I've had sort of a highlight tour of different times of exhibition, and I remember in those days the art houses were like on the eastern edge of Hollywood. They were the Los Feliz,
yes,
and they were on Western Avenue. There was a series of theaters, that were the cinema and that sort of that that chain, and there was
the Monica Theater
and the Monica Theater, the single screen,
which is
the single screen Monica on Santa Monica Boulevard, which became a Pussycat, and the Vagabond was like MacArthur Park,
right?
Tom Cooper, who also had the Tiffany, I think, for a while.
Yeah, well, things changed, and and actually, I mean, in that sense, arguably, I mean, yes, you also had a lot of these theaters were moving from showing art films to porn films, but you also did see because
it was part of the trail
because
of
the success of A Man and a Woman, also the art house theaters probably moved west at that point when those films couldn't open Westwood anymore because all of a sudden Hollywood films were playing at those theaters.
Right. So, and it was insane.
But when you came to Westwood, it was Westwood.
It was Westwood. It was the last years of Westwood, So
for people who don't understand what that was or really remember that era, I mean, how would you describe it?
Well, in those days, people's lives were defined by what parking space they got in Westwood on Saturday night. I mean, it was insane. And those were the days in which I look back at it, but you see it in New York City and you see it in other big cities where there would be like a movie would be in 113 minutes long, and it would play at 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. There'd be like 7 minutes to get a sold-out audience out and a sold-out audience in. No time for a trailer, hardly, or whatever.
No reserve seating.
No reserve seating. There was all those paper tickets, and they would just jam it through. And so it would force people to wait out in line, up until like 5 minutes before showtimes. But, I think the producers have sort of loved the excitement of it. They were like living billboards for the movie. It was like bragging rights on Monday that there were lines around the block for my picture,
Right.
Or practically any picture that was doing business because everyone was forced to stand out in the cold, but it was kind of exciting and people were like, ooh, wow, that would be totally unacceptable in today's, people wouldn't. It was exciting. And I don't know. I know that the Laemmles, Man Theater scooped up the leases away from the Laemmles. One of the legendary stories, may be a lie, I don't know, is that one morning the Laemmles picked up Variety and read that Man Theaters had acquired their theaters. But
not impossible.
Very possible, Although I remember once at the Plaza, toward the end of the Plaza, I was there and in walked Rhonda Fleming, movie star from the 40s, also Mrs. Ted Mann.
Did not.
And she was like, hello, this and that. It was kind of odd the way she was. I thought, why is she? It's soon to be mine, Rhonda Fleming is gorgeous. Whatever, out of the past or whatever. And it's odd though, because when they became Man Theaters, I lost a job, but really though, when they come in about 82 or 83, when just a year or two later things were starting to unravel in Westwood. A lot of people make a big deal about a sort of a criminal thing that happened at one of the theaters.
There was a shooting.
There was a shooting, and everyone got freaky about it. I'm never going to Westwood again. But a lot of people were also saying, I'm just tired of being tortured. I'm tired of,
I can go to the Century City.
I can go to Century City. And that's when the clearances changed, too. That was the big thing, too. We're like, wait a minute. For, in those days, the exclusive for that meant it didn't play Santa Monica until later on the run.
Definitely didn't play Santa Monica.
But when it started playing Santa Monica and the Century City opened up, there were options, and that really dissipated it, I think, as much as any other stuff. But it's kind of funny. Then it got fashionable to kind of trash Westwood as like, it's over. It's over. But it was a very big deal, to have a film that would open in the Upper East End of New York and it would open in Westwood and be a sensation.
So how do you contrast that with working at the Sunset 5 opening, in the 90s when it really was going?
Yeah, well, that was exciting too. I thought, that opened in '92. And took a while, but it opened okay. But then it became a thing, and it was interesting, and that was pre ArcLight Grove and all the. Then everyone was suddenly things were looking warmer in Hollywood, that you would ignored all these years, and those became big venues, and changed things a lot. It was very exciting because there were a lot of sold out shows, and there was an energy about it because there were so many young directors, and that we all know who went on to have big careers, like Bill Condon and even I always, God, what is his name? Alexander Payne. Mm-hmm. Is that his name?
That is his name. Yes,
he's huge. Well, of course, he did his student film it was a 16 millimeter thing that he did at the Monicas for Academy qualification.
Oh my God, I didn't.
And I was brutal. He was one of those people that would say like, and during this scene, can you turn the sound up? Have the projectionist.
There's no one in the auditorium.
There's no one in the auditorium. Isn't there a thing called sound editing? Or did they not teach sound at UCLA? I don't know what. And I would be snippy with him, but he loved it. He would all, and he was a great guy. I like him a lot, and I would run into him at like LA Conservancy events, and he would like, "Oh, Roger." I don't know if he
I remember when you were mean to me.
I remember when you were mean to me.
Any other patrons, not who were filmmakers, not necessarily unknown, maybe known filmmakers or stars or whoever, who just liked to see movies and wanted to see them in a movie theater?
There were quite a few. I always talk about Mel Torme because he went to all the movies, and I wouldn't chat with him about the movies so much, but he just loved the experience. He loved to be alone, and he loved it when the lights went down. He loved the old single screen and the curtain went open, all this and that. And then he would talk about the film afterwards, and he was just like a fellow movie lover, and he never would badmouth much. He would always talk about what he loved in it. There would always be a performance or something. And I thought, this is brethren. I felt like I was but I don't know. We had some big people that would come in at the Laemmle theaters from time to time, and they, some of the ones that you would
some of them were regulars though,
and many of them were regulars, and some of them that you would think of like, oh well, that must have been a high maintenance event, were totally charming. Mm-hmm. Barbra Streisand waited in line, bought a ticket, at some point like, sometimes would say hello, sometimes wouldn't, The actress from Tootsie.
Jessica Lange?
No.
Gina Dave?
The funny one.
No, you're going to get me in trouble. Terry Garr.
Terry Garr, the fabulous Terry Garr.
Yes.
I remember seeing her walking in front of the Music Hall Theater once. And she came up to me. I don't know what we were showing. Maybe I think it was My Life as a Dog or one of those films, and that's the story. She said, "Is this any good?" And I said, "It's as good as Tootsie." She went, "You wish."
So did she go in and say, what did she say on the way out?
No, she was just walking by. Although I remember Lily Tomlin coming in and seeing something, and she came out in tears. And I said, "I knew you would love this." And she says, "How do you know that?" And I went, "Goosebumps," which is her famous last line of the play that she did.
Search for Signs of It.
Search for a Sign, yeah. She just looked at me and said, "Oh, you." That was charming. And, I mentioned My Life as a Dog.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You
were managing the Music Hall Theater when that played there?
It was ran at the Music Hall Theater. It's another one of those films that just played and played and played because that's what they did, And if it only played for a couple of months, like, well, what was wrong with that? They must have had something booked.
Well, that was a problem. I mean, if you were booked behind a certain film at a theater,
that's right,
and the film in front was a hit, you might not open.
That's like Star Wars
back or whatever.
Like Star Wars being kicked out of the Chinese so they could run the sorcerer, the freaking sorcerer, like on week 3 of the Star Wars war. Yes, that's a famous one.
That is a good one. So for a few years, you left Westwood, left our employ, and you went to work at the New Art.
Yeah. It's so wild because when I look at it, what a chance to work Westwood, to work the era of the single screen, long run, mega box office foreign language circuit. I mean, you would see Jack Nicholson. I wasn't there. I saw Fanny and Alexander there, but they used to tell me that on opening day, Jack Nicholson was sitting on the pavement waiting for the box office to open, waiting to get in. And then also the New Art, which was, I was there essentially because I had lost my job at Lumley Theaters because it had become a man theater. Although maybe it was alluring to think that I might get to work for Rhonda Fleming.
Exactly. I mean, seriously.
I know. But also, oddly enough, for man theaters to take over in the near the mid 80s or early 80s, that was the beginning of the end. In a way, it wasn't too many years after that where the party was over.
Yes, well, monopolies are not good for anybody. Let's leave it at that.
That's true.
Maybe for Milton Bradley, but that's
maybe for Milton Bradley. But it was fun. I was the New Art was so bizarre because that was in an era still. It was in the early '80s when it was the pre-VCR.
Right. So it was still a rep theater during the day.
It changed films every night.
Wow.
It was a calendar house that had these calendars with a double feature, a different double feature every day. You changed the marquee every night. You changed the posters every night. You changed the recording every night. But and you were at the mercy of what prints that you got. Because a lot of times, even back then, you were getting prints that had been vandalized. That projectionists, as collectors, had cut out their favorite moments. There was one print of, is it Annie Hall that has the cocaine joke where he sneezes on the cocaine on the table? That scene was cut from some of the prints because I guess there was a projectionist thumb that thought it'd be fun to have. And
you just never know.
You just never know about cocaine and projectionists. But anyway, but I was so shocked when I first worked there. They were running two obscure films that were not. I didn't consider. I forgot what the titles were, and it was like it was on a Monday or a Tuesday night. It sold out. It used to sell out like 3 times a week.
Right.
And that was like a 500-seat theater. It would be a double fee. They would fill it up, and then that was it was a different world. But then that world dissipated with VCRs and all the rest. And actually, some of those prints. There was the color faded ones too.
The pink.
There were these pink versions of The King and I.
Yeah.
Where it was all that glorious color was gone unless it was an original Technicolor thing, 3-strip Technicolor.
Midnight movies. What were the midnight movies?
Well, that would be for me. There were midnight movies at the New Art, of course, which were at that time. And when I was there, it was Eraserhead on Fridays and Pink Flamingos on Saturdays.
Would David Lynch stop by?
No, but they both made...
Or would Jack Nance, maybe?
Right. Both Lynch and John Waters made amusing trailers just for the theater, just for Landmark Theaters, introducing the film that were very amusing and stuff. But I never saw him come in. And it was strange because Eraserhead had a very male following that guys were just... So, and it wasn't a big grosser, but it was a reliable grosser, and there were always bored girlfriends waiting in the lobby for the movie to end. And for their boyfriend, it was maybe the 3rd or 4th time he'd seen the film because he can't get enough of it. So go David Lynch, But anyway, I remember that phenomena about it, and I just remember it starting and hearing the music, going, "Oh gosh, here we are." But it was fun to be a part of it. And of course, Pink Flamingos was Pink Flamingos.
Was there a point in Pink Flamingos where you knew someone was leaving the auditorium because they were so offended that they...
Famously, it's that last scene, wow. Which is what some people just sort of waited for. I sort of liked the Pink Flamingo audience, because I think that those John Waters movies are amusing on their own, on their own level, and I worked a couple of them because at the Plaza Westwood, we had the one that was in Odorama with the smell-o-vision. I know, polyester, yeah. And we had Divine make an appearance for that and John Waters. And John Waters made an appearance at the New Art that I was at, in which we introduced to the audience William Burroughs. For me, going to college in the 60s.
Sure, the beach.
To be in the same room with William Burroughs was just mind-blowing.
Right.
I had nothing to say. John Waters at the time was... The only incident he talked to me was about being friends with Tex Watson, the Manson follower and killer and stuff. Not friends, but he somehow had some sort of conversation with him, and I said, well, yeah, he's a grisly murderer, but I guess he was cute. And then he sort of took offense at me, like, and that was my only.
That's your only reaction.
I guess I offended John Waters. I guess that's my claim to fame. I don't know. He's fabulous, of course. And I live in Fresno now, which is a gag. When people tell, hey, I do dinner theater in Fresno, they go, that's a fabulous laugh line. But we, the old Tower Theater across from us where we perform, we had John Waters appear and it sold out, and stuff. So I thought, wow, and everyone just loved him because he's very amusing.
Can we talk about coming out, being a gay man growing up in an Eisenhower era?
Yeah.
And then, because you worked and the movies reflected, when you talk about John Waters going to Fresno now and being embraced.
It's mind-blowing,
Kind of.
to me, at that sort of stuff, and
yet you were ground zero for a lot of this. I mean, La Cage aux Folles.
Yeah. One of those long-running films at the musical theater.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I was obviously gay to most anyone, but I never knew. But I never was too out about it, And I had a very homophobic boss who wasn't you, but someone below you.
Yes.
And he would talk about this fag and that fag, and there I was.
Just throwing it around, yeah. But in terms of the movies, I mean,
Well, it's interesting because
was there anything about saying, people, not only am I seeing this representation on screen, but audiences are coming, they're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Can I take some kind of not pride, but is this an opportunity now to say we don't need to hide?
Right. It was a growing experience for me as a middle-aged man. I think there's a certain amount of internalized homophobia amongst certain older gays, and I might have been that. I mean, I had attended gay pride events when they were on Hollywood Boulevard and stuff at Griffith Park before it was Santa Monica was a thing. I just attended as a tourist from Fresno or stuff. I noticed that Bob Lemley, your dad, the late great Bob Lemley, he used to tease me and say, "Now, Roger, we've got a theater coming online that has your name on it," and he meant the Sunset 5 in West Hollywood.
Okay.
And I went, oh God. And then and in some ways, I decided, I think that I had my own sort of internalized homophobia about it, and that to me, West Hollywood meant twinks. And there's a contemptuous, and I had a kind of a put down people that lived in West Hollywood. They were just too, if they were too feminine, look at me, as with my hands in the air going, if they were just too feminine, that stuff. And I had that kind of, oh God, I guess I'm going to have to work, with those twinks in West Hollywood. I can't bear them. And of course, the Sunset 5 became a kind of a gay icon too. It was also a spillover for the Gay and Lesbian Film Festival, which was nearby at the Writers Guild and all that stuff. And of course, there was that thing where you could show any piece of shit, but if you had a one sheet with a guy with a bare chest, you would have a $20,000 opening weekend.
Yes. Yes, I did have that.
And I really feel that the audience, the gay audience, and of course, it was a learning curve for me because I went to the Sunset 5 and I discovered what an asshole I was and how contemptuous and snotty I was. and how wonderful these people were. And they weren't all twinks, but the twinks were some of the best ones, you know. And I adored them. They were good customers and intelligent people, and they had a sense of like, yeah, we know this is shit, but we're here and we're having fun, you know. I also feel that
there was plenty of films that weren't shit.
and there were a lot of wonderful films, but everyone was so desperate for being seen on the screen, or for just being out there, for existing, as to be part of like, oh look, there's this and that it was so rare, especially if you come from a small town or a more kind of a repressive environment. Not all of it, but much of the bread and butter at the Sunset 5 for a time were these 16 millimeter or blow up coming of age stories.
Yeah, Edge of 17.
Love stories, you know. Some of them very good, some of them just dreadful, but there was an audience for them. But I do feel that the market kind of got flooded with them. And as time went on, they were there for any time there was a gay film. People would call me and call the theater and say, which ones are gay? I hated that.
Right.
Like, pardon me, but maybe I still have this hatred toward, who knows?
Well, but it was a victim of its own success.
It was a victim of its own success.
Not the Sunset and theatrical, but all of a sudden it was like, okay, there's an audience that wants to see this. So we're going to put a gay character in My Best Friend's Wedding.
Right. Right, absolutely.
Famously. Or we're going to have a show like Will and Grace.
As long as he's funny. Well, yeah, I know. You know, or wears a dress, you know, or something, you know.
So then you didn't need to go to an independent movie anymore to see this because it was mainstreamed.
My customers would say, yeah, I just can't go to a movie just because it's gay. I know this is going to be just total shit. I love the fact that maybe there.
Not, but yeah.
Maybe not. You know, the poster is alluring. It always had a great one sheet.
Correct. Yeah. Many of them were always great films to begin with.
Yes.
But obviously you transitioned to something like Gods and Monsters. Is it specifically a gay film? Is it not a gay film?
Is it not a gay? Whatever.
Is it just a good movie?
Yeah.
That I want to see.
Gods and Monsters was a scope picture, as I recall. You know, and if you were at the Sunset 5 and you had a scope picture, you wanted to be in House 1.
Oh yeah, yes.
You know? So the filmmaker, not that I'm saying it was Bill Condon, but it was, would say, well,
can you get me?
I know. I said, well, it's all about the grosses. I mean, that is the big house with its big 280 seats, as opposed to the other, I would always try to sort of favor, because it looked fabulous. Scope looked fabulous, better than it did in 2, 3, and 4, But 5 was okay, and stuff. But then I think it was replaced by that Elizabeth film.
Yes.
That opened in the big house, and he had a wonderful sense of humor about that sort of stuff, and it was a wonderful film, and he was, he did wonderful work. He makes wonderful films.
Yes.
He's a great filmmaker. So. And was
and invites you to his Oscar parties.
I was at one or two of them. Yeah. He was. It was lovely, and I had some dinners with him, and they were just fun people to be around. Right. So it was. I was happy for that.
So you graciously agreed to appear or be interviewed for the documentary that was being made about Laemmle Theaters, only in theaters, which is where I met.
It's a wonderful film.
Thank you.
What is the name of that filmmaker again?
Okay.
Is he in this room?
He is in this room. Let's bring on Raphael Sparge. I'm listening.
I hear laughter. That's a good sign.
I had to put myself on mute because I was laughing so hard.
It's like, this is welcome to This Is Your Life, Roger.
This is your life. I had the same thought. That's so funny. Yeah. Hello, Roger.
Wonderful to see you. I wish you were here in person.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm working on the East Coast, and we figured out a way to do this. This is the first way I've sort of done it this way. I'm normally sitting where you are.
Yeah.
But this was an opportunity to kind of like at least be somewhat virtually in the room with you. So
yeah. Well, I wasn't told until just yesterday that you wouldn't be here, and it's taken me a while to recover.
Oh my gosh, Roger, it's so good to have you here. I mean, Greg and I started this this conversation, this, Inside the Art House platform, as it were, for out of working on the movie that we did, the documentary about the Lumley family, and you were so
eager for
let me put it this way.
attention.
Your interviews were amazing. I was thinking about this, so we were putting together the extras for the DVD, right?
Yeah.
There's only a certain amount of space, right? I'm working with Kino Lorber, and they're supposed to say, okay, so you've got like this amount of space. And so I've got, Cameron Crowe, and I've got, James Ivory, and I was hoping for, and I had, Ava DuVernay, and a bunch of folks. Yeah. I reached out to James Ivory people, and they didn't get back. It didn't happen. And I basically said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going with Roger.
Yeah. On the extras, when you go to the extras page, I'm listed. It's alphabetical order, so I'm on top of the. I topped Cameron Crowe. Screw him. David. Christensen's on top.
Where you
that's my favorite screenshot of the whole thing.
Oh, that's
anyway.
So good. Yeah, there just were so many great stories, and there wasn't room for all of them, so we put some of them. The hope was to tell a story about this family, and obviously the theater at the center of it is such an important part of how this gets told. But you were there. You were there with Max and with Bob and with Greg, and you had such an extraordinary vantage point, and you brought so much color and dimension and heart to the telling of this, and it was just just so grateful that you could be there, and you were such a kind of a fantastic herald of the time, as it were.
Yeah, and I remember Max. What I remember so much about Max, sometimes that you would go into the Lumley office. We would have manager meetings on occasional Fridays, and he would come into a movie occasionally, but he would be sitting at the desk across from your dad. But sometimes he would be reading a New Yorker article on a like Monok d'Amérique or some film on and he would want to have a discussion about, did you see that film and what did you think about that? And he was most specifically interested in what about it did you like, and what did you feel about this? And he was very into heady intellectual stuff. He was like this European gentleman, that was there. I mean, and he's such a contrast to Bob in that he was a little guy and Bob was a basketball player, there. But they were both wonderful. And Bob was very warm to me. I think he told me this one, that he likes tall people. So I think I had an edge. I think he was kinder to everyone that was at least 6 feet up than he maybe to the ones that were below.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's something to think about, because there were times where I got a pass when other people didn't. But I think it was just because I was big. He was always very straight arrow with me. I always knew exactly. I like people, and he likes people where you know where you stand. He could be blunt, but he was friendly. And when he came in, I never felt, he looked threatening if you were smaller, like, oh my God,
yes.
Who is this, But no, not with that big smile. And he had a sense of humor. And he had a sense of, I felt, a perspective about things, having grown up in it, and stuff. And so I always loved it. I always enjoyed working with him. I felt it very much at ease with him and stuff. So
at the funeral, one of my cousin Jay talked about my dad in the context of team, because he was a basketball player.
Yeah.
And yes, Michael Jordan will say there's no I in team, but there is in win.
Yeah.
But still, that's true. But the idea, the team is made up of different players, and they have different strengths, and sometimes you have to tolerate teammates who may be different or not everything that you love about them.
Yeah.
But
if there's enough
but if
there,
you're a team, then you and play together and figure out a way to use everybody's strengths. You can win.
Sure.
And I think he tried to use that concept. He maybe sometimes putting up with people that he shouldn't have put up with, or behaviors that he shouldn't have put up with. And I'll say that.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, the idea was, no, this is how we're going to. I'm not going to favor one person or another because it's the team that really matters.
Right.
And I think at their best, our theater managers did that as well. And they figured out, okay, I know this projectionist, he's got this idiosyncrasy or whatever, but he has his strengths, and I'm gonna work with him because he gets the picture on screen.
Right.
And he fixes a problem when there's a problem. And I think that was your greatest strength, because ultimately, were you the best at paperwork? Were you the best were you the tightest at scheduling? I don't know. But you know what? The theaters worked, and they had personality, among the staff people.
And I had good assistant managers. Who did all of my work. I would like to go back on another topic regarding about being gay and working at the Sunset Five. Sure. There's another thing there that sometimes there's a story that goes along that I think it's sort of misinterpreted, where someone made the remark, a famous radio personality made the remark, "Oh, he's as gay as the manager at the Sunset Five," which I always laughed that off and kind of poo-pooed it. But I have to tell you that when I think about it, how offensive that was, and I was masking my real feelings about it, because another reality of working at the Sunset Five is that we were all perceived as being gay, whether we weren't or not. It was because of the product. There were a lot of guys there, and a lot of good-looking guys who worked there that were not gay, but were, I guess, assumed to be or whatever. It kind of went with the territory, and everyone was cool and everything was fine. We had, there was a time at that time where people from the outside, from Palmdale or south of LA or whatever, would get loaded and come into West Hollywood to roll queers. And two of my employees were beaten up. One of them was straight, and another guy was sent to the hospital. He was
just
beaten
at the theater,
as he was walking home
on
Santa Monica, walking home from the theater,
right,
and just slugged to death. So I don't mean to. Sometimes I go, oh, that's funny. Oh, he's just. But actually, it's that kind of shock jock mentality that gets out there into the world. Like, oh, let's just make fun of the gays in West Hollywood. That's part of that culture in some way. So I don't want to make it sound like that is a joke or acceptable. Right. It was a homophobic remark made by a famous person, and it should be regarded as that, because if you're there and after you visited someone who almost died, who was in the hospital because his skull was clubbed in, by some thugs. Yeah, it needs to. It means there needs to be. And as I poo-poo, coming of age, lame. So I got to remember that context. That there was some serious shit going on there.
That however far we've come in terms of allowing that John Waters can go to Fresno.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's John Waters because he's famous. But if the next gay person that rolls through the town might not, get such a great welcome.
It's true.
And yes, we've come a certain distance, but we're not where we need to be.
Yeah.
The fight continues.
The fight continues, but it was...
The fact is that, Roger, is that everyone who spoke about you just said what a light you were, how happy you made them, how much they look forward to seeing you at the theater. You were both kind of a welcomer and a guide, and sort of there, the careful hand, and always a laugh. There was just sort of a sense of presence that you brought to the lobby that kind of made everyone feel good because, Roger was in the house, and that was everyone said that. Everyone I spoke to.
Well, that's very kind. But of course, if they love movies, I love them. That kind of a thing. Even if they like terrible movies, because there's a lot of terrible movies I love too, But I enjoyed. Bob encouraged that. to me, he would say, Roger, I want you at the door as much as possible. Have your assistant work on the payroll down
Right,
in the
just
office.
talk to the patrons.
Stand at the door, be at the door, and if I wasn't at the door and he came, he goes, where were you?
Yeah.
So I was, like the hostess with the mostest. I was like the Pearl Mesta of whatever, I enjoyed playing gracious, even if I wasn't always feeling gracious.
All right.
Sometimes it's just acting as is, as if, that kind of policy really makes your life better. Like, hey, if your job is to be gracious and have a good time, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing at all.
It's not a bad thing at all. It was a wonderful life, and I'm so grateful for it. So,
Thank you very much for coming.
well, thank you.
Being here.
So good to see your visage. Thank you for inviting me, both of you. You guys have been such a important part of my life and a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Rob, for this one. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here inside the Art House. If you like the episode, please subscribe. Please come back for more and go see a movie with popcorn.
Yeah, with popcorn.
Buttered or not?
I swear, there's no such thing as bad butter. Don't give me any. I don't care about cholesterol or anything. It's got to
be buttered. Got to be buttered.
Got to be real butter. Okay. Thank you.
Take care.
Right,
Roger, take care.
Take care. Sure.
All right.
Bye.
Our show was produced by Raphael Sparge with on-site producer Norrin Dickerson. Supervising producers are Thomas Cassetta and Miles McCreary. Our show was edited by Gabriel Emley and sound mixed by Thomas Cassetta. Our musical theme is composed by Isabel Engman and Gerardo Garcia Jr. Marketing by Gabriel Emley. Show graphics by Jenna DeAngelis. Additional marketing and web design by Stephanie Peters. Filmed at the historic Lumley Royal Theater in Los Angeles, California. See you next time on Inside the Art House. If you like today's show, please consider subscribing to our channel to learn more on Inside the Art House.